Yeah, you know, the last month or so has been a pretty strong move, although it's been in small bites. And so I think what derails it is that if we don't get some of the positive things that I mentioned, if we don't get a follow-through in earnings, and you know, we're going to start to get into more difficult comps in earnings because this is, I think, the fourth quarter coming up of what we believe is going to be earnings growth. So that's an issue. If we don't get better tax policy or less regulation. If the impact of the hurricanes in the third quarter here turn out to reduce economic growth substantially so that we're still around that high 1% to 2%, I think those are all things that could derail. And also with respect to the Fed raising interest rates and likely raising again next year several times, if the dollar gets too strong again as a result of that, or as a result of a new Fed chairman coming in with a more aggressive interest rate or hawkish policy tone that would drive the dollar, that could be bad for U.S. exports. It could derail the U.S. economy a little bit, and it could also derail emerging markets as well. So those would be some of the issues that I would look out for.
Do you agree with Gunlak that Neil Kashkari has the potential to become the next Fed president? I know that this is one of the areas of the market, as you've just talked about, that you're watching.
Well, I mean, I've stayed out of the sort of parlor game of the revolving door of names. I mean, I have no idea. I think the biggest issue for me is that what we have to have, not necessarily hawkish or dovish, you could have either, but I think the big issue is you've got to have monetary policy and a philosophy at the Fed that is going to complement the state of affairs and fiscal policy. So if you're going to tighten, you have to have more pro-growth business fiscal policy and tax policy to head off a recession or too much of a rising rate environment too quickly. So I go back to the 1980s with Paul Volcker and Ronald Reagan, where you had tight money supply to squeeze inflation out of the system from the 1970s, and you had very aggressive tax-cutting policies of the Reagan administration, and those were complementary actions that really propelled the U.S. economy forward. We need something nowadays that is also complementary in that vein.